Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Meg Metcalf. I am the current president of the DC Library Association, as well as the LGBTQ plus studies specialist and librarian at the Library of Congress here in Washington, DC. And I am here today with Dr. Jake Newsome. And if you want to introduce yourself and your titles so I don't mess anything up, go ahead.
Sure. First of all, thanks, Meg, and hey to everybody. I'm Jake Newsome. I'm a scholar of LGBTQ history, American and German history, focusing on the fate of LGBTQ individuals during and after the Holocaust.
Amazing. And how long have you been at the Holocaust Museum?
So I have been at the Holocaust Museum this month makes 4 years.
Oh my gosh, and I'll be 5 years at the libraries this August. So that's exciting.
Nice. Yep.
And I feel like we both have in common where people don't necessarily think that there's going to be LGBTQ researchers at our institutions. Do you find that people are surprised to find that you exist?
Yeah, but it's always a quick moment of surprise because of course, when people think of the Holocaust, they think of Jewish victims, and they don't, usually necessarily think immediately of the Nazis' queer victims, and which of course includes queer Jewish people as well. But my research in particular focuses on the fate of non-Jewish gay victims. And so a lot of people, they're surprised to think about it, but usually the next sentence is, "Oh, but I guess that makes sense," And so I don't know if that was the case 20, 30 years ago, but at least now it's usually an easy transition to talking about the topic.
Oh my goodness. I know. And I've worked with, as you know, we have a lot of German collections at the library. And so my love of German LGBTQ history sort of started when I came to the library and realized that there are all these amazing connections between LGBTQ history between Germany and the US, including Henry Gerber, the first gay rights organization in Chicago. He came from Germany, right?
Yep.
And I think it's interesting. I feel like nobody really is really aware of these connections other than historians, which I find fascinating, especially because the pink triangle, right, has become such a huge symbol in the gay community, and nobody realized that actually comes from the Holocaust. But so yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, right, before the rainbow flag became the really predominant symbol of the LGBT community, the pink triangle was the main symbol. And so you can see I've got it up there, but it was beginning in the 1970s, really this emblem and logo of gay liberation. And I think, which you usually see it always going around the internet, usually during Pride Month or in January when we have International Holocaust Remembrance Day, where there's usually like a few articles going around saying, "Did you know there's a darker history to the pink triangle?" And it just usually states that, okay, the pink triangle was a badge that the SS forced gay concentration camp prisoners to wear. And then it just kind of moves on and says, and then in the 1970s, it was a gay rights logo. And so there's kind of like this disconnect of how do you go from a concentration camp badge that literally was a marker of not only shame and humiliation, but in most cases, damnation and death, to a gay rights activist logo, 30 years later to today, where you can see it, in pop culture, music videos and other instances of LGBT culture. And so that's actually what my research focuses on, is like, what is that, like, how do you trace that transformation and tell that story? And so I'm happy to talk about that here if you want.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's interesting too, because I wonder about, so there's this American use of the pink triangle, and I'm very curious, was it used in Germany? Because I know I have some friends who are German who will comment on the continued use of the pink triangle. And so I'm wondering, like, what is their perception of it? And also the history, as you mentioned as well, of course.
Yeah, so the pink triangle, right, both as a concentration camp badge and as a gay liberation symbol, both originated in Germany. So right after the war, after the Holocaust was over, there was a serious silencing effort to keep essentially gay victims, the Nazis' gay victims, from speaking out about their experiences. And this stemmed primarily from the fact that most of the West German conservative public, but also the West German government itself, continued to view gay victims not as victims at all, but rather criminals who had been essentially constitutionally punished. Maybe, yes, they admitted maybe it was a little too harshly by the Nazis, but again, there was still, their punishment was constitutional under the law. And so what we see happening in West Germany after that is essentially a closeting of both gay survivors' sexuality, but also their memories, because they weren't allowed to express their memories and advocate for, acknowledgement or compensation in the same way that other victim groups like the Jews were able to. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that there weren't a handful of survivors who, said, it doesn't matter what you tell me, I'm going to tell my stories and I'm going to, share about my experiences. And one of those was a guy who we now know as Josef Kohut, who was an Austrian. He spent 5 years in a concentration camp because he was gay. He was sentenced under the law in Germany at the time was called Paragraph 175. This was their anti-sodomy law. But in 1972, so we're talking, nearly 30 years after he is liberated from the camps, he decides to break his silence and tell his story. He has to do it through not just one, but two levels of anonymity. He tells his story to an acquaintance who then publishes his life story under a pseudonym. So I actually have a copy of the book here, but he publishes it under the name Heinz Hager. And it's just a very simple title. It's just called The Man with the Pink Triangle. And so this is the first published autobiographical account of a gay concentration camp survivor. So
wow.
There's the backstory, right? So what's going on in 1972, this is the moment of gay liberation, right? Especially in West Germany. And gay liberation groups in West Germany, particularly in West Berlin, and this is, it's actually not unique just to the German case, but it's also in the American context where coming out is now not just a personal decision, but a political tactic, right? That it's in order to help liberate the gay community and bring equality, one has to first liberate oneself from the personal closet. You have to be able to come out and publicly claim that identity. And so one of the ways they were thinking about it is, well, maybe we need a gay logo, right? Something that we can wear that will automatically signal to the rest of the public that I'm gay and I'm part of this community. And this West German group, they tried all kind of different badges. Like they had all these different logos and ideas, ranging from the lambda symbol, which was being used in America at the time. Some of them suggested a 175 for that, the paragraph 175, like with a cross out over it. And some of them said, no, that's too specific. Like we're looking for broader liberation. And so it's at that time that Hager publishes his book. And this group goes, they read the book, and it's kind of like one of those aha moments where they say, like, this is it. It's the pink triangle. Because number one, it's simple, it's sleek, it's powerful, but they knew that automatically the German public would recognize it as a Holocaust symbol. Right? So suddenly now history is being captured and used to push for legal equality in the present. And so the liberation activists were very cognizant of that and choosing this Nazi symbol for their new movement.
Wow. Well, I mean, branding is important, right?
Yeah.
I definitely have heard of that book before, but has it been translated into English, or is it only available in German?
Nope. So it is available in English. It was first published in America in 1981, I believe. But there has been a recent one, I believe, like in the mid 90s, a new edition of it that has a really helpful like historical introduction that gives the broader context of Joseph's story. And so I definitely, it remains the first, right, gay autobiography. There's a couple more that are available now, including, and there's a documentary with some interviews of gay survivors. So fortunately now, we are able to really kind of get into the stories of these individuals and tell their stories in some detail, right?
Wow. I kind of want to start using the pink triangle more now. I mean, when you think about its history, it's such a powerful symbol. And I know I've just seen it used so widely, from ACT UP to various like Pride advertisements. And you're right, nobody has a clue, the origins. And I think that's true for pretty much most of LGBTQ history and most of our symbols. There's a mystery around it, right? Because these archives, when they were kept, are not always accessible. So I'm interested, because you work, you work with patrons and other researchers, right, in your role, in your day job, which, this is an unofficial event, but wanted to ask, I think a lot about how we can make LGBTQ history more accessible. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that in particular.
It's interesting because we do the work of making this history accessible to researchers. And so, right, part of that is like even just the mundane stuff of behind the scenes, like being able to tag archival material with certain, keywords, like this is LGBT or this is a trans, topic, which of course, even when I can speak, as a researcher who before I began working at the Holocaust Museum did research there. And, when things were accessioned and or put into the archives 20, 30 years ago, of course, that nomenclature was not in use. People weren't necessarily even looking for trans stories in the Holocaust. And so that doesn't mean that they're not there, but it's a matter of now going back and finding them and making them accessible for the researchers, who will then be able to process it, digest it, and be able to present it to us as museum staff, but also the public in ways that are engaging. We have actually the museum, I guess I can give us a little plug, like it's Pride Month, and so we're doing this week, this entire month, the whole series of social media posts and Facebook Live events that are telling some of these untold stories, because wow, we know Hager now, but in the past 30 years, we've actually, we've been able to uncover some more individual stories. And so it's nice to have a platform that you can tell those stories that remind visitors or viewers, because no one's visiting in person during these times, but viewers to our pages, that, these folks aren't just stats. They had complex lives. Sometimes, they're not always easy to tell those stories because it may bring up issues that are today ourselves uncomfortable with. But again, I think it's just important to not only always depict LGBT individuals as just victims, right? Because a lot of LGBT history is a history of victimization, but we're not all just only victims. And so being able to give agency to these folks who lived in the past, I think, is a really important facet of my work. And, folks like yourself too, who are trying to not only identify, but then uplift these stories as well.
Absolutely. That is so well said. I definitely feel that, especially when you are not just a researcher in LGBTQ studies, but someone who is part of the community. I feel like there's this extra sense of pressure, right, to feel like you're elevating the history of your people. And sometimes it can be even emotionally overwhelming. And the kind of work that you do, looking at gay Holocaust, I'm not going to say victims, I'm going to say survivors, individuals. Yeah. I wonder, is it something that creates like an extra emotional load for you? Does this kind of research become emotional. I think that's something we don't talk about enough. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's almost like you work, and I've had people ask me that before, like, how do you work at that museum every single day? You're dealing with this incredibly heavy topic, and especially, when I work with, I study gay victims. I myself am gay. Like, I have that connection. So it's not just kind of some abstract academic research project for me. And it does get heavy, but of course at some level, your body, has like a survival mechanism, I guess, where you become somewhat, jaded is not the right word, but protected against it. You try to keep some type of distance from it, even though it's really hard, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to move forward and do this work. And so it's important, and my colleagues and I talk about this all the time, to remember, not only honor the people we're studying and pay tribute to them, but also realize that in doing the work we're doing with our outreach to different audiences, we're trying to digest this incredibly violent, horrible history into something where we can draw positive, affirmative, inclusive, and equitable lessons out of it. Now, that's not to say that every single day that works. And it's, the moment that always gets me, or they're usually unexpected, when I stumble across a new story in the archives. I'm finishing up a book, and was, of course, like, doing some last minute revisions. I realized I needed to change something on my footnotes, and so I went back to my notes from the archives and stumbled across the story that I had it. It was in my files, but I had never studied it before. And it was one of those stories that just went straight into the heart, and I had to set it aside, for about 5 days, and just said, okay, I'm going to have to go watch Netflix and just completely not think about this right now, because even whenever you think you can put on your historian hat and do it in a way that protects your emotions, things, they'll get you.
Oh my goodness. So you're telling me healthy boundaries are important. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think that is so important. And it gives me a lot of hope to just have conversations like this, because I think that is how we keep going, right? Is we empower our community of knowledge workers, even to illuminate the darker stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I feel like we covered a lot of topics. Is there anything else? I know you have a meeting to get to. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, one thing that, we mentioned it at the beginning, the fact that, of course, the pink triangle is a marker of LGBT culture and identity, but that's, if you asked anyone today, right, what's the major symbol of the LGBT community, I think you'd be probably pretty hard pressed to find, someone to say the pink triangle. Everyone would say the rainbow, right?
Right.
And so that's also, I think, a really interesting story about the transition from pink triangle to the rainbow flag, because as we mentioned briefly earlier, that even though the symbol, the pink triangle, started in Germany, within months it jumped the Atlantic, and it showed up in New York and in Miami and in San Francisco, and being used in activism in America as well, in which I don't want to get off on a huge side tangent here, but right, it's important for us to remember that the gay liberation movement was part of this transnational, transatlantic, social movements of the long 1960s. And so, of course, people, the activists themselves, are like, they're traveling, and like they're taking their history and their knowledge with them. So in a way, it's not super surprising that this symbol, which became so powerful in Germany, jumps the Atlantic and ends up in America. One thing I do find interesting, though, is that American activists are really easily able to adopt it and adopt the history of the pink triangle as their own, right? Even though there weren't gay Americans in the camps, they suddenly are talking about, their brothers and sisters who died in the camps, because this pink triangle helped them establish like a a gay history that like gays across the world could connect to and take, take ownership of because they were gay, right? And this transcended any national boundaries. And so that's one of the things that I find really fascinating, is the way that this history was able to help lay a foundation for a sense of community across national boundaries. But of course, not everyone agreed that a gay community should be rooted in, use a symbol like the pink triangle that should be rooted in such, darkness and damnation. And so one of these folks was Gilbert Baker, right? The guy who created the rainbow flag. And so this is in 1978 in San Francisco. Gilbert and actually Harvey Milk, like they decide the parade that's coming up in June in 78, they want a new gay logo that wasn't something from the Nazis that they had to reclaim. And so Gilbert says, like, okay, well, what can I do, right? And he ultimately thinks, okay, rainbows, they're not only beautiful, but they're natural. They're found everywhere. And of course, all the many colors coming together in one flag represents, the diversity of the community. And so in a lot of ways, Gilbert himself actually thought of the rainbow flag as an antidote to the pink triangle. And of course, that was in 78. The pink triangle doesn't go away. We see it in ACT UP. In fact, it actually has a renewed life in ACT UP in the 80s. But I think that it's also not a coincidence that as even the nomenclature kind of shifts from, gay community to LGBTQ community to immediately represent the diversity, that it's during that same time in the 90s that the rainbow flag really comes to represent the diversity of the global community.
You know what, as you were talking, it struck me that the pink triangle has sort of more, I would think of like a radical meaning in terms of, in particular, state suppression and genocide of the queer people, right? And so in some ways, would that make the rainbow flag more of a assimilationist symbol than the pink triangle? Because now that I think of it, the groups that have used the pink triangle that I can think of, like Bash Back and ACT UP, like those are all very politically radical groups.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, like, that just kind of struck me as you were talking. Is the rainbow the assimilationist symbol?
I do think that the rainbow symbol, right, is meant to be, I guess, more open to, queer people who don't necessarily claim a political or radical sense of self or like that part of their identity. And so it is more, I think, inclusive in that terms. I mean, you do see it. You do see the rainbow in political activism, social activism. But
I use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not that it's not political, but the rainbow certainly has that non-political component built into it in a way that I think the pink triangle was always meant to be explicitly political. Now that doesn't mean that it hasn't showed up in non-political spaces. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, there's like Lady Gaga sings in front of a pink triangle in one of her music videos, and Nike put the pink triangle on some of their shoes a couple years ago. So it's like, whoa, it's crazy.
Whoa. I was gonna say, I don't know. I was like, do the corporate pride floats ever use it? But I guess occasionally they do dip their toes in the waters.
Occasionally, but it's, what's really interesting is in this kind of new moment that, or at least newly, this moment we find ourselves in, which we're all kind of being forced to recognize the systemic and like deep-rooted inequalities that are built into our systems. There are a few organizations that are like calling for a comeback of the pink triangle, like as explicitly political, that we need to be able to return back to some of these more, I guess you could say, like radical approaches, because I mean, sometimes, like, look, if you look back in history, it's those radicals that get the progress. We need everybody. Of course, we need everybody in the movement. But there is a push now. I've seen online to like, let's revive the political power of the Pink Triangle, which I think
think
is
I
super
might
exciting.
be joining that group.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. Oh my goodness. Anything else we have not covered yet today?
I mean, I think we covered my entire book in like 20 minutes.
When is your book coming out, by the way?
You know, I don't have a date yet, but I'm hoping.
Publishing's a little right now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
COVID has definitely impacted that as well, but I'm still got my fingers crossed that it'll be out next year, 2021.
How long is the footnote section going to be? I always like to ask researchers because I know you've been working on this for how long? For years and years.
A long time now. So we're gonna have a quite a hefty, you know, note section at the end for anyone who wants to dive in and figure out I know, talk about those notes. You know me, I love a bibliography. I love a good works cited. And I feel like this is an area that I'm sure you'll agree needs more attention. So I just cannot wait. And hopefully we can have a big party for you in person maybe when it comes out. Maybe. That would be nice, you know.
I hope so.
Wherever we post this, I'm happy to we can provide some links for folks who are interested in further reading. We can make sure and provide those in the links below.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think that something people will learn from your work and also from your book is that there are so many connections between German and American LGBTQ history. And I think it'll blow a lot of people's minds, because I was certainly very shocked and excited when I started learning about those connections. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so excited for your book, and it was just amazing to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Always fun to chat with you, Megan. I can't wait until the day that we all get to hang out in person again.
I know. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. Bye, everybody.
Bye.